in my experience, you can't be curious about something that you have zero knowledge of. So there are gaps in my knowledge which drive my curiosity. Curiosity and enjoyment have been the drivers for me, and particularly curiosity when it comes to learning new languages. Ever since I had my first exposure to a professor at McGill who made me curious about French culture, all of a sudden, I was motivated to learn the language, curious, looking forward to learning more and more. The 20 languages that I have learned, always I've been driven by my curiosity about the country, about the people, about the culture, about the history. And I've found it rewarding then to discover things about that language, culture, history, and to discover the language. And there's a lot of research now on how curiosity is a major driver of learning, how it works in our brains, how it enhances memory. And I will leave you some links to articles that I discovered on the internet that explain how this all works. I hope you're curious enough to check these out. But in my experience, you can't be curious about something that you have zero knowledge of. So there are gaps in your knowledge, gaps in my knowledge, which drive my curiosity. So I had some knowledge of French, wasn't that interested in high school, but this professor was able to trigger my curiosity. So, for example, I'm not very curious about differential calculus. I'm not very curious about quantum physics because there's too many obstacles there. I don't know very much about those things. Similarly, if I start into a new language, I'm not curious about the details of the grammar. I might be a little curious about how the language works, but as I get into it further and I discover gaps in my knowledge, because I've got some knowledge, then my curiosity drives me to look things up, conjugation. How does this work? Why is this structure this way? So constantly, renewed curiosity based on a gradual increase of knowledge is what's driving my learning activities, my curiosity, and my rewards. And again, these articles will show you how curiosity gives you a dopamine reward in your hippocampus and all of this good stuff that I don't fully understand. But curiosity is absolutely key. Some of these articles talk about the relationship between predicting something, anticipating something, and then the eventual reward, which is so much a part of how we learn languages, our ability to predict, and then the result is slightly different from what we expected, and all of this is driving us forward. But it has to start with that curiosity. Now, how do we become curious? If I'm a teacher, how do I get people to become curious? I think we have to recognize, in my view, that the emotions are a big part of it. So people talk about their bucket list, so they're curious to do something, maybe a safari in Africa or whatever. There has to be some knowledge, but there also has to be some kind of emotional attachment to it. And I think my professor at McGill University, who made me enthusiastic about learning French, he was able to inspire that degree of emotional attachment or commitment towards learning French. There's a famous line in one of the books that I read by Manfred Spitzer that a father or a mother who reads a story to their child, which is a story that the narrator, the father, the parent, is not interested in, that there is no emotion in the voice and the child learns less. Whereas if the father reads something or mother, that they are very interested in, that they understand, that they're passionate about, the child will learn more. So to some extent, the curiosity, this is much like the discussion about AI. It can't all be rational. It can't all be sort of an extrapolation forward of information. There is this element of emotional commitment towards learning something new, which I think is a big part of curiosity. So we have to cultivate that curiosity. As the French say, l'appétit vient en mangeant. You have to be open to that curiosity. If you're on a cruise ship in the Adriatic, get off the ship, go to a local restaurant. In other words, you have to expose yourself to these things so that your curiosity will be piqued, but at the same time, some degree, hopefully, of positive emotional reaction to a new experience will also encourage your learning and your curiosity and eventually your enjoyment. So I happen to be a very curious person. I'm curious about language. I'm curious about how languages work. My curiosity grows as I learn the language because it becomes more precise, more specific to aspects of the language, or more precise and specific with regard to aspects of the culture. And sort of my interest can change for a variety of reasons. Like right now, I'm more interested in Canadian history, and particularly the history of the Native peoples of Canada, than I ever was before. Previously, we would get that in school. I wasn't very interested. Now I'm very interested. And so I'm reading things on that subject. My interest in the Ukrainian language was as a result of my exposure to the events in Ukraine. And so, I can be more or less interested at different times. So right now, for example, I'm interested in the impact of curiosity on our ability to remember things. So I look up articles on the internet. And as I've been talking about here, whenever I see a video at YouTube or I read an article on a subject of interest, it's also an opportunity for me to either in a language that I have learned and maybe where I have become weaker, or in a language like Persian or Arabic that I'm working on right now, I can then take that article or YouTube video, take it to Notebook LM and create a lesson in that language. So as an example, one of the articles that I found on curiosity and memory, I decided that that would be an opportunity for me to review my Ukrainian. And so I went to Notebook LM, created a little podcast dialogue in Ukrainian on this subject, which I am looking forward to studying on Link. So there's many ways that you can use your curiosity, which may wax and wane, to stimulate your learning, give yourself a dopamine kick and continue learning. And a final note, one of the curious things that I discovered in reading these articles is that not only does curiosity increase our ability to remember and therefore to learn. So if we're curious about a grammar point, we're more likely to remember that grammar point. But apparently the research shows that once our curiosity is triggered for a particular bit of information, then we will become more curious about other things and we will be able to remember other things better, so that the benefit goes beyond the particular, item of information that you are curious about. So curiosity and the related sense of enjoyment when we satisfy that curiosity is a tremendously powerful force in our lives. And I think we have to recognize that curiosity and the desire to learn is essential to who we are as human beings, whatever our age. So thank you for listening. Bye for now.